This is the untold story of the making of the modern world. A fresh perspective, charting the spread of civilization across the globe. From the dawn of mankind and the first cities and empires, to the belief in one God. We follow the flow of civilization from the Middle East, an extraordinary place that has been a vital link between the continents of Asia, Africa, and Europe for millennia. An economic, scientific, and cultural center of the world. This is an epic journey of discovery. From the east to the west. Today, on the outskirts of the town of Sivas, in modern Turkey, horsemen gather together to play Girit, an ancient game of immense skill and stamina, using the traditional Girit, or spear. It's an extreme test of reflex, bravery, and horsemanship. Riders attempt to catch their opponent's spear in mid-flight before launching into a fresh assault. But Girit isn't just a game. It's a 1,000-year-old tradition, an echo of an ancient lifestyle on horseback, when the ancestors of these riders played it to hone their equestrian and battle skills as they began to transform the world forever. A 1,000 years ago, the dividing lines in the Middle East and Asia Minor seemed firmly drawn between the great Islamic empires and the lands of the Byzantines, the Christian successors of the Eastern Roman Empire. But at the turn of the new millennium, new forces were beginning to rise in the distant steppes of Central Asia that would turn this old order upside down. First came the Seljuk Turks, who journeyed thousands of miles and took on the Byzantines. Followed by Genghis Khan and his Mongol tribes, who wrought destruction throughout the Islamic world before converting to the faith themselves. Timur the Great, who from his glittering capital in Samarkand created an Islamic Renaissance. And his descendants, the Mughals, whose rule in India would produce one of the richest, most vibrant cultures in history. This is the story of a region that created some of the greatest empires and emperors the world has ever seen, transforming the balance of world power and redefining both East and West forever. This is the story of the Asian Crucible. The rugged steppes of Central Asia. 1,000 years ago, a bleak terrain inhabited by nomadic horsemen. a region on the fringes of the Islamic world since it had been conquered by the Arab armies. A vast landmass which stretched from modern-day China and Mongolia in the east to the Caspian Sea in the west, Afghanistan in the south, to Russia in the north. But a region that had also played an important role as a hub between east and west, the territory through which the Great Silk Road passed, bringing riches from China and India through to Europe. By the 11th century, the most powerful inhabitants of this region were a Turkic people, the Seljuks, recent converts to Islam whose tribal warlike culture had given them dominance over this harsh, inhospitable terrain.
Bozkır'da yaşam çok sert ve iklimin kötü olması, avcılığa ve hayvancılığa dayalı bir yaşam tarzının olması bu insanları çok sert, savaşçı, hayatta kalmak için devamlı mücadele etmek zorunda kalan insanlar yapıyorlar. Zaten savaş stratejileri de böyle bir yaşam tarzında çok önemli olan ata binme ve ok ve yayı çok iyi kullanma üzerine kurulu.
Over 300 years, using their military skills, driven by the search for better pasture and the spoils of war, the Seljuk Turks not only swept through the steppes, but began to spread out of their Central Asian homeland towards Anatolia, the lands of modern Turkey. Their arrival changed the balance of world power forever, as the cultures of East and West, the Christians of Byzantium and the Muslim Turks, clashed head to head. It was here in eastern Anatolia, on the 26th of August 1071, outside the town of Malazgirt, that the Seljuk forces came face to face with their Byzantine foes. The Seljuk leader, Alp Arslan, confidently led his army to the edge of the plains. The barren landscape a perfect setting for an army which had thrived in the harsh terrain of the Central Asian steppes.
Burada gördüğünüz açık alan Türk savaş stratejisinin uygulanması için çok uygun. Hafif tepelerin olduğu, Türklerin pusuya yatıp düşmanı kendilerine doğru çektikleri savaş stratejileri için çok uygun. Steplerdeki gibi at üzerinde rahat hareket edebildikleri, stratejilerini istedikleri gibi uygulayabildikleri topraklar.
Alp Arslan's forces had already capitalized on their adaptability to this landscape, weakening their enemy through skirmishing and sabotage. They had burned the Byzantines' food sources and poisoned their wells. But still the Seljuk cavalry were heavily outnumbered, and rather than going for all-out attack, the Seljuks used hit-and-run tactics to draw their enemy into a lethal trap. They had speed, they had weaponry, but most importantly, they were highly skilled.
Selçukluların oklarının Bizans zırhlıları için dahi çok öldürücü ve korkulan silahlar olduğu bilinmektedir.
Under pressure, the Byzantine infantry attacked. As the Byzantines approached, the Turks feigned retreat. Then from behind the rocky hills, the hidden Seljuk archers emerged on horseback. The Byzantines were surrounded and in disarray. The Turks closed in and crushed them. Against the odds, Alp Arslan's warriors had destroyed the mighty Byzantine army, the Byzantine Empire losing its hold over the rich lands of Anatolia. The land known as Rum, meaning Roman Empire, that had been ruled by Christian Byzantines was now the Seljuk Sultanate of Rum, ruled by Muslim sultans. As they cemented their rule, their new capital, Konya, became the spiritual and cultural heart of the Seljuk state. Scholarship, craftsmanship, and religion, including Sufism, a mystic branch of Islam, flooded in from all over the Muslim world, bringing with it the cultural heritage of Central Asia and the Middle East. The departure of the Byzantines and the arrival of the Seljuks marked a monumental regime change, but it didn't mark a complete break with the past. The region of Cappadocia, the land of beautiful horses, had been the hub of Anatolian Christianity for many centuries before the Seljuk invasion. And today, in the town of Aksaray, Christian dwellings, rock monasteries, and frescoed churches still honeycomb the steep gorges and hillsides. But it is nearby, in the 16-mile rock-cut gorge, the Ilara Valley, where archaeological evidence reveals the remarkable relationship between the Christians and the incoming Muslims.
This richly decorated rock chapel dates from about 1290. It was put up to be the burial chamber of some rich local citizens, and they could afford to decorate the church to the very highest Byzantine standards. There you see archangels dressed as they would have been 200 years earlier in the heyday of the Byzantines. And there's Christ in Transfiguration. And over this side, you can see the 12 apostles.
Over the centuries, the frescoes have been defaced. But what they reveal is that this is the tomb of a wealthy local Christian living under Seljuk rule. The Seljuk success wasn't simply territorial. It was a victory over hearts and minds.
What we've got over here is really quite remarkable. There's nothing like it either in Turkey and certainly not in Cappadocia. Here we've got someone in Oriental dress. This gentleman is wearing a turban, big black beard, flowing white robes, long sword by his side. And he's standing beside someone who is recognizably the Christian saint, St. George. Well, who are they? Well, the answer's written on the wall. It was written at the time. But what's important are these big lettered inscriptions in white. Those were painted at the time. They tell us very clearly that this person here is Basil Giapupes. He commands Christian troops. He's probably also a local landowner, but his loyalty is not to the Byzantine Emperor Andronikos, but to Mesut II.
So although Basil Giagupes was a Christian of Byzantine ancestry, under this new world order, he actively embraced the Turkic way of life. Not only wearing Seljuk dress, but pledging allegiance to the Seljuk Sultan.
And this is a very interesting snapshot of how quite wealthy and prosperous Christians lived, worked, and served the Seljuk dynasty, even to the point of fighting for it and presumably dying for it. One gets the impression that the two populations mixed relatively easily in the centre of the country, and that's one of the reasons why Islamization went so deep here so early.
Through ethnic, religious, and cultural interaction, the line between conqueror and conquered began to disappear. Here, there was no clear east-west divide. This was a cultural crossroads. This cultural vibrancy was enhanced by the constant flow of caravan traffic travelling east and west through the region along the Silk Route. And to help the movement of travellers and trade, the Seljuks built a series of fortified rest stops, caravanserais, 30 to 40 kilometres from one another, the equivalent of a day's travel, allowing trade to flourish between east and west like never before. By the 13th century, the Seljuks had created a vast empire, not only ruling Anatolia, but controlling swathes of Central Asia and the Middle East. In their original homeland, tribal rulers acted as lieutenants to the Seljuk Sultanate. The stability created by their governance brought vast amounts of wealth into the whole of Central Asia. And as a result, cities like Bukhara in modern Uzbekistan became some of the richest and most vibrant centers in the Islamic world. Its prominence epitomized by one of the last remaining architectural wonders of the period.
Minora-i Kalon tarixga to'xtaladigan bo'lsak, bu obida 1127-yilda Qoraqonlar hukmdori Arslonxon tomonidan qurilgan. Lekin minora mana shu islomni eng yuqori nuqtaga ko'tarilgan bir davrda, ya'ni Buxoroda o'sha davrda mahalliy sulolalar, sadrlar hukmronlik qilgan, sadrjonlar hukmronlik qilgan bir davrda qurilgan.
Standing at over 50 meters high, the Kalon Minaret was an engineering triumph, the tallest building in Central Asia at the time. And to support this vast structure, its foundations were buried over 9 meters deep into the ground.
Bu yerdan turib, ana turli joylardan keladigan savdo karvonlarini kuzatish mumkin bo'lgan. Bir so'z bilan aytganda mayoq vazifasini bajargan. Lekin asosiy vazifasi minoraning bu muazzinning nimalarni musulmonlarni namozga chaqirishdan iborat bo'lgan.
By the turn of the 13th century, Bukhara could look back on centuries of glittering achievements. But in 1220, all that was about to change, with events that would not only transform the future of the city, but the whole of Central Asia and the Seljuk Empire. As the city's lookouts surveyed the distant horizon from their monumental watchtower, it wasn't the welcome sight of an incoming trade caravan that met their eyes. It was the terrifying vision of an invading army preparing for battle. The Mongol forces had arrived. At their head, one of the most bloodthirsty and fearsome warlords the world has ever seen, Genghis Khan.
Чингис хааны язгуур төдий эсхий туурахт улсыг шулуутгаж барс жил онны тэргүүнээ хурж 9 хөлт цагаан туг байгуулад Чингис хаанд хан цол тэнд өгөв.
Genghis Khan was, I think, one of the greatest leaders in history because he started from practically nothing and as a nobody, and yet he created the world's greatest land empire. It was many times larger than the Roman Empire, and that was just a beginning.
By the year 1220, Genghis Khan had already united the tribes of Mongolia, and under his leadership his territory also covered half of China. But now his attentions turned to Central Asia. Although aware of the fate that might await them, the Bukharans refused to surrender. With the misplaced confidence that they could hold out and defeat their enemy within the mighty defences of their citadel, the Ark, a fortress-like structure which had been built and rebuilt since the 5th century, with 20-metre-high walls surrounding the whole perimeter of the city.
Chingiz Khan Buxoroni olgandan keyin to'g'ridan-to'g'ri demak otda arkka kirib keladi va bu yerda to'plangan xalqni oldida shunday xitob qiladi. Men sizlar Tangri tomonidan sizlarning ustlaringizga yuborilgan qamchiman. Gunohlaringiz uchun, bu yerdagi illatlar uchun men demak jazo sifatida sizlarning ustlaringizga yuborildim. Bu yerda kimsasiz qolgan hovlilarni talashga kirishilgan, bu yerdagi mol-mulklarni talashga kirishilgan, muqaddas joylar butunlay oyoq osti qilingan va juda katta boylik to'plangan.
The effect on Bukhara was devastating. Its wonderful monuments, the glittering culture that had flourished for 400 years, now lay in ruins, only the citadel and the minaret surviving. One of the great wonders of the Islamic world now towering above a wasteland as a sad, solitary reminder of this once glorious city. No wonder that Genghis Khan's invasion of Central Asia inspired terror throughout the Muslim world.
To his enemies, he was a complete catastrophe. And people in the Middle East still look back to Genghis Khan as a mass murderer, the greatest devastation, who brought the greatest devastation that you can imagine to the great cities of Central Asia and the Muslim world.
As Genghis swept through the Islamic world, any city that resisted suffered the same fate as Bukhara. From Konya, the capital of the Seljuks, to Baghdad, home to the House of Wisdom. And the Mongol Empire now stretched for thousands of miles. At its greatest extent, covering an area of 33 million square kilometers, 22% of the Earth's total landmass, with over 100 million people under Mongol dominion. But while the Mongols' rampage initially decimated the Islamic world, as they began to interact with the inhabitants of the territories they had conquered, the Mongols themselves would eventually turn to Islam. Today in Isfahan, Iran, the Friday Mosque reveals that some Mongols were no longer the enemies of Islam, but were becoming devout followers. The writings on the mihrab celebrate the conversion of Genghis Khan's great-great-grandson to Islam. The Mongols' gradual conversion had a dramatic effect on the lives of the people they conquered, as archaeological investigations in eastern Anatolia, once the heartland of the Great Seljuk Empire, have recently revealed. The city, Alat, had flourished as an important trade center. It is still home to a huge historic Islamic cemetery. The 4,000 tombstones which survive record the lives of the elite of Seljuk society in Alat between the 11th and 15th centuries. But it's the nearby cave tombs which reveal the way different Mongol groups interacted with the people they conquered. Discoveries in these caves show how the incoming peoples learned to coexist with the local population. Here in Alat, it seems that a mixed community of Seljuks, Muslim Ilkhanate Mongols from Iran, and Buddhists from Mongolia were able to live and be buried alongside each other.
Yeryüzünün üzerindeki mağara incelendiğinde sadece bu mağaraya has bir takım bezemeler görüyoruz. Bir sivri kemerle vurgulanmış bir alan, üzerinde 2 tane zümrüdü anka kuşu karşılıklı bakıyor ve ortalarında bir lotus çiçeği var. Bizim için önemli olan şu, ortada lotus çiçeği ve 2 tarafta zümrüt anka kompozisyonu bizim Çin'de ve Asya'da diğer Budist inanca sahip kaya tapınaklarında da gördüğümüz bir kompozisyon. Lotus ve zümrüt anka kuşu birçok kültürde ve birçok dinde ayrı ayrı kullanılıyor. Bunlar sadece buraya has demek istemiyorum kesinlikle. Fakat bu kompozisyonla böylesine bir kemerin içinde kayaya oyulmuş olarak bu formda karşımıza çıkması, benzer örneklerine baktığımızda buranın Budist inanca sahip kişiler tarafından kullanıldığını bize düşündürür.
The discoveries of Akhlat reveal how Islam encouraged the Mongols to live more amicably with other cultures. But throughout Central Asia, growing cultural and religious harmony in no way amounted to peace and tranquility. The conflict seems typified by the region's traditional sport of buzkashi. "700 years ago, the lack of a dominant figure such as Genghis Khan or the Seljuk Sultan left a power vacuum, and the region was beset by infighting as tribal warlords sought to gain the upper hand. But in the middle of the 14th century, from the Chagatai Khanate in Central Asia, a new leader, with both Turkic and Mongol ancestry, was about to build a new Islamic empire, Timur the Great.
Timur claimed that he was a perfect Mongol. He claimed that he was the only one who really understood Genghis Khan's heritage.
Timur's ambition was to create an empire that would rival that of his role model, Genghis Khan. As city after city and region after region fell before him, as they had before Genghis Khan's Mongol horde, the destruction was similarly devastating. But whilst Timur was just as brutal as his predecessor, he wasn't simply driven by bloodlust. Although he spent 90% of his life as a nomadic warrior, as a great Islamic leader he wanted to leave behind something more than a great empire and a trail of destruction.
Timur was aware of the fact that although he had this nomadic background, he needed to present himself as an urban sedentary ruler. So that's why he needed a capital.
The location he chose was 100 kilometers from his birthplace, Kesh. Samarkand. Like Bukhara, Samarkand had grown rich on the fruits of the silk trade, but it too had been devastated by the Mongol hordes. But now, as his new capital, Timur was determined that the city would not only rival but surpass its former glory. And today, his greatest monument, the Bibi Khanum Mosque, built in 1399 when he was over 60 years of age, is still one of the largest mosques in the world, testament to the scale of his ambition.
Mana biz Amir Temurning jome masjidini bosh peshtoqi oldida turibmiz. Shu oldindagi maydonda. E'tibor qilib qarang. Bu Markaziy Osiyoda qurilgan binolar ichida bu peshtoqdan kattasi ulkani yo'q. Eng ulkan bino, eng ulkan peshtoq. Buning enini oladigan bo'lsak, buni 20 metrga yaqin masofani egallaydi. Bu juda katta masofa. Peshtoqning tuzilishiga e'tibor bersak, bir go'zallik qonunlaridan biri simmetriya deb ataladigan simmetrik qonunga asoslangan. Chunki bosh o'q tekislikni o'tkazib, mana shundan ikki tarafda muvozanatda ishlangan barcha narsalar, ikkita minora, ikkita burchaklarda turgan minora, keyin peshtoqni tashkil etuvchi bu minoralar, bular 3 qavatdan iborat bo'lgan aslida. Hozir biz bir qavatini ham ko'ra olmayapmiz, qulab tushgan. Yana shuni e'tibor bilan qarasangiz, qarang, peshtoq nimada turibdi? Bu kursida turibdi. Demak, imorat kursida turibdi. Mana shu kursida, kursidan keyin imorat qurilgan. Imoratning mahobatini qarang. Balandligi, umumiy balandligi 47 metrdan baland. Umumiy balandligi. Buncha mahobat, bu albatta buni faqat Amir Temurgina ishlashi mumkin va unga xos bo'lgan xususiyat edi.
As Timur rebuilt his capital with magnificent monuments, Samarkand grew into one of the greatest cities the Islamic world had ever seen, the Pearl of the East, its population soaring to 150,000. It attracted not only traders along the Silk Road, but artisans and craftsmen whom Timur had gathered from across the globe throughout his conquests. And today, Timur's legacy still dominates the modern city. The Registan, built by his grandson Uleg Beg, not only reflects the monumental scale of the Timurids' achievements, but their patronage of scholarship and learning.
Biz hozir Registon maydonining qoq markazida turibmiz va oldimizda demak 15-asr Ulug'bek davrining madrasai, demak eng yirik madrasa, oliya, madrasai oliya deb ataladigan o'sha davrning universiteti bizni oldimizda turibdi. Mana bu universitetni agar arxitekturasiga qarasak, uning mahobati bizni lol qoldiradi. Uning munaqqashligi bizni lol qoldiradi. Bu detallarning, shakllarning o'zaro bir-biriga mutanosiblig'i lol qoldiradi. Bu binoda demak falakiyot fani o'rganilgan, matematika fani o'sha davrning eng davriy hayotiy fanlari, nafaqat diniy, shariat fani, balki dunyoviy fanlar ham barchasi mana shu yerda o'rganilgan.
By the end of the 14th century, Samarkand was the epicenter of an Islamic renaissance, at the core of an empire which connected trade and ideas between East and West. Timur's dream had been realized. Over the past 4 centuries, Central Asia had become a crucible spawning some of the greatest, yet bloodiest leaders the world had ever seen. The power of their empires not only illustrated by a flowering of culture, but rampant destruction in equal measure. But while these rulers had triumphed at home and in the West, one prize had always evaded them all: the East. But at the turn of the 16th century, all that was about to change, as a descendant of Timur and Genghis Khan emerged from the steppes of Central Asia, the first of the Mughal emperors, Babur, a ruler who would take Central Asian ideas and culture in a totally new direction: India.
Genghis Khan himself wanted to conquer India. He came up to the borders of India and went back. Timur, of course, came here and conquered and then went back. Babur, in fact, says, I came to India because it belonged to my ancestors.
It was on the 21st of April 1526, at the Battle of Panipat, that the Mughal leader Babur set his forces against the incumbent Sultan of Delhi. Armed with 15,000 troops and a limited artillery, his army was pitted against a force of over 150,000, bolstered with 300 war elephants. But within a matter of hours, Babur had outmaneuvered and killed his foe. The leader of the Mughals had become a Mughal emperor. But ironically, although Babur was now the ruler of one of the richest kingdoms in the world, he disliked his new prize and yearned for home.
In many ways, coming from Central Asia, India, or Hindustan as it was called then, must have seemed like a land of plenty. You planted grain in the fields and it just seemed to grow miraculously. But Babur was still clearly challenged by the conditions there, and we know this because he wrote about it in his autobiography, the Baburnama. Hindustan is a country of few charms. Its people have no good looks. Of social intercourse, paying and receiving visits, there is none. In handicraft and work, there is no symmetry, method or quality. There are no good horses, no good dogs, no grapes, muskmelons or first-rate fruits. No candles, no torches, not even candlesticks.
But despite his loathing of the country, Babur wasn't about to give up his prize. He was here to stay, and if he wasn't going to return to his beloved Central Asia, he was going to create a little oasis of it right here in India.
What you are seeing here is a typical Mughal charbagh, a garden design tradition which was brought by Babur to the Indian landscape. It was a very tenuous link with the landscape that he had left behind, so he wanted to superimpose a very familiar spatial order into this alien land, so to speak. And they were like territorial markers, that is, it was trying to establish control over the land.
Water channels not only helped to remind Babur of the flowing streams of Central Asia, the earthly paradise he had left behind, these gardens were also a symbol of heavenly paradise.
There is a description in the Quran of paradise being a place beneath which flow the rivers. The original paradise garden would have had a lot of fruit trees. All this would have been filled with orchards or with a whole lot of shrubs, exuding a lot of smell, because fragrance was the essence of paradise. They really became centers for courtly life. And anybody who was somebody had to have a river-facing garden.
But while recreating a slice of Asia was motivated by Babur's desire to feel at home and stamp his mark on India, his ultimate ambition was to recreate an empire which would equal the achievements of his ancestors Timur and Genghis Khan. Babur's own territories now stretched thousands of miles across northern India. And within 30 years, although he wouldn't live to see it, the Mughals too would boast monuments and achievements worthy of his ancestors. The first was a tomb built for his own son, Humayun. For the first time, Central Asian design began to be fused with Indian materials and craftsmanship.
It's unbelievable that the Mughals got such great perfection in the very first building the dynasty built in India. Just like 400 years ago, even today visitors are filled with awe because of the splendor of the building.
And importantly, the Mughals realized that if that was to happen, they couldn't survive simply by importing Central Asian ideas and culture into the country as Babur had done with his gardens. If the empire really wanted to flourish, its rulers had to engage with the local landscape, its people, and traditions.
Humayun's tomb, when it was built as a family tomb. It is still known as the House of Timur because there are 160 Mughal family graves in the building. What is so special about Humayun's tomb is that this was a first on many fronts. It was the first enclosed garden tomb built to this scale. The Humayun's tomb is almost 150 feet tall. The building itself covers a floor area of over 2 acres. Just the finial is 6 meters, almost 2 stories. The earlier tombs in Delhi were, 10 of them would fit into this one building. This was the announcement of the Mughals in India. Here is a new dynasty. Here is a much greater dynasty than India has seen before, and we are here to stay.
And as the tomb undergoes major repairs today, the restoration project on over 72 niches reveals how the Mughals engaged with Indian culture. While the geometric patterns are Central Asian in design, the craftsmen carrying out the work are Indian, just as they were 300 years ago when the tomb was built.
I think what was important about this building was Persian and Indian craftsmen came together to produce a synthesis of Timurid architecture that almost breathed perfection into the whole. You've got motifs such as the Kangura pattern, the six-sided star. The six-sided star you see in Islamic buildings from here all the way till Turkey and beyond. Arches, domes, corner minarets, ceramic work. No wonder that this was the architectural style chosen for the most famous Mughal monument of all, Taj Mahal. So Humayun's tomb is actually the precursor to the Taj.
Cultural integration played an important role in the establishment of the Mughal Empire. But it required more than the blending of architectural influences and the employment of local craftsmen to ensure any lasting success. The luxurious lifestyle of the court in these pleasure palaces was the exclusive realm of the Mughal elite. And in the 16th century, that elite numbered around 700, ruling over a population of 120 million. The Mughals faced a huge challenge to keep the people on side. People who were not only culturally and financially worlds apart, but the majority of whose religious beliefs were also at odds. 90% of the population were Hindu, while the Mughals were Orthodox Sunni Muslims. Remarkably, however, the early Mughals did manage to create harmony out of potential division. Part of the key to their success was that they also patronized another branch of Islam which was instrumental in spreading the religion throughout India: Sufism. Shrines like that to Nizamuddin Auliya still attract Sufi devotees today.
For the past 700 odd years, this has been a sacred spot. It's not just a pilgrimage, but a place where people come for, of course, to seek the Sufis' blessings, but also to come and communicate with themselves, with a higher mystical order, to listen to qawwalis. It is, in a sense, a mystic getaway in a city like Delhi. Sufism is the mystic part of Islam. The Sufi loves God more than anybody else, and the Sufi is in a direct quest for God. By 1200 AD, there was a constant stream of visitors coming through Multan, through Afghanistan, coming into India, bringing the message of another kind of Islam. And so much so that Delhi was the beating heart of Sufi Islam.
When the Mughals arrived in India, they were quick to support Sufism as their ancestors had done in Central Asia. A decision which, in this multi-faith melting pot, aided the acceptance of their rule.
There are places of worship which keep away some people. The Sufis are very inclusive. Nobody is excluded. Everybody is allowed in. Sufism helped the Mughals enormously because the Mughals could not have ruled over this large an empire if they had held a brief for only one lot of people. And I think what they learned from the Sufis was how you need to take along people, you need to be inclusive.
The patronage of the Sufis was particularly advantageous to the early Mughal Empire. The Sufis' inclusiveness meant diversity in religion could create harmony, not discord. Through leadership, organization, and the fusion of cultural and religious values from Central Asia and India, the Mughals created a period of remarkable stability and, as a consequence, an immensely wealthy empire. And it was under the Emperor Shah Jahan that the empire would not only enter its golden age, but begin to attract global attention.
By the time of Shah Jahan, the levels of wealth and opulence were quite extraordinary. Visitors from all over the world at this time recognised just how splendid this place is. This, for example, is the accounts of two Dutchmen who came to visit the place. The nobles here live in indescribable luxury and extravagance, caring only to indulge themselves whilst they can in every kind of pleasure. In the palaces of these lords dwell all the wealth there is, wealth which glitters indeed, resplendent in the eyes of the world.
Shah Jahan was keen to spread that grandeur across his empire. In 1638, when he moved his capital from Agra to Delhi, he named it Shah Jahanabad and began creating fantastic monuments worthy of his ancestors. The Jama Masjid, reminiscent of the monumental mosques built by his Central Asian forefather Timur, and the Red Fort, a palace surpassing the grandeur reached by any of the earlier Mughals. By the time he had finished, it was not only the largest city in the world, but also considered the grandest. But it was on the banks of the Yamuna River in Agra that he created the monument that would forever epitomize the magnificence of Mughal rule. Ironically, not built only as a show of power, but as an expression of personal grief, of undying love. The Taj Mahal.
Shah Jahan's wife, Mumtaz Mahal, his favorite wife, died giving birth to the 14th child of the couple. And Shah Jahan was shattered. And he wanted to immortalize his love for the lady in a manner that the world will remember her for as long as the world lasts. In Shah Jahan's imagination, this is how paradise would look like. One, the white marble signifies serenity, peace. There would also be perfect order in paradise, and therefore everything is symmetrical, everything is in place. There is no sense of any chaos here.
Despite its sad origins, the Taj Mahal marked the pinnacle of both Shah Jahan's and the Mughals' achievements.
The Taj Mahal itself stands at the pinnacle of not only Shah Jahan's glory but Mughal Empire's glory in a way. It stands for it because it sort of signifies peace, serenity, harmony, symmetry. So in a way, it's a metaphor, as it were, for the whole empire and its duration.
Following in the footsteps of his ancestors, Shah Jahan had created a monument which reflected the past, his Central Asian heritage, celebrated the present, the greatness of the Mughal Empire, and most importantly, promised a future. With a legacy which to this day epitomizes the grandeur, the beauty, and the achievements of the empires and emperors who 1,000 years ago emerged from the steppes of Central Asia. The Asian crucible, which would forever shape the makeup of the modern world.